Good evening, everybody. This is Rob and Jordan, and we are back for Archangel Ink Live number 55. It is a pleasure to be here. Jordan, welcome.
Thank you. I'm having a great day too. Hope you are. Hope all you people out there are. We're going to talk about some audiobook narration tips, and it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Perfect. So let's just jump right in, Jordan. Audiobook narration tips, improve your next recording is the subject for this evening. And our goal here is to help with actually the narration portion of it. We'll talk a little bit about technical elements to it and room preparation and so forth. But this is designed for people who are getting into audiobook production, especially authors who are looking to produce their own audiobook, in their own voice and want to make their book sound really good and high quality, as high quality as possible. We did say in our email, make yourself sound like Morgan Freeman. Can't promise that will happen exactly, but we want to get as close as possible to a good, positive, engaging listening experience as we can as authors and as creators. And so that's what these tips will be as we start and open up.
Good deal. And I think at this point, Rob, I know you've worked on tons, maybe hundreds of different audiobooks, and you've even recorded your own, correct?
Yes.
I've worked on several. I've recorded my own books as well. The only book that I wrote that I didn't record was the very first one because I just wasn't familiar enough to do it myself. So I just had someone else on ACX do it, which I was very happy with. So that's another option. But since then, I've recorded all my books, and I love it for a lot of different reasons. So we do have a lot of experience with this. I think that's why we were coming into this pretty excited and pumped up, maybe nerding out a little bit on audiobook stuff. But audiobooks are awesome. I love them. But they do have to sound good. So hopefully we can help you out with that.
Right, exactly. Something that Hassan Osman, who's been on this channel before and who we've mentioned a couple of times, he points out that if you have a podcast and you've done that kind of thing, that's nice. But there is a little bit of an expectation for a cleaner, higher quality production when you're actually buying an audiobook, because you're paying for it. A podcast in many cases is free. I mean, obviously there are paid ones and so forth, but people are a little bit more forgiving, of technical issues, of ums and ahs and stammers and linguistic issues. But when it comes to audiobook production, you really do want to make it clean, crisp, tight, and high quality as possible. So, that's the spirit that we're offering some of these tips and recommendations in.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. All right. So we've got here 10 tips to a great audiobook. And as always, we do aim to make this short and punchy, and we'll do our best to kind of run through them, cover them in some detail. But folks, if there's anything that we cover that you said, well, you guys really didn't talk about it enough, we want to know more about that, let us know. We'd love to hear about that in the comments. That can be an inspiration for future videos, or just addressing it on the questions and so forth going forward. All right. With that said, number one, watch out for breaths and learn to modulate your breathing. Thoughts on that, Jordan?
Yeah, I think this is something you really have to, it really comes with practice. But when you're thinking about your audiobooks, Rob already mentioned, you don't want there to be a ton of breaths in there. When you're listening and watching us live on a video, that's normal. It's normal for us to pause and breathe. Same thing is, as you already mentioned too, Rob, with the podcast. This is standard. It's normal for people to be saying and having those things, because that's normal. It's normal for normal conversation. Obviously, we want to, when we're speaking, we want to limit our ums as much as possible. But when you're thinking about an audiobook, it really needs to be very few and far between, because for the most part, you're not, unless it's in your book, in the writing, you're not going to be having those pauses or deep breaths to start the sentence. It just sounds weird, and it sounds less than professional. So modulating your breathing really is just getting used to your cadence of your voice and making sure that you're not taking these huge deep breaths in between. That can be distracting to the reader. I think most of these tips, when you're thinking of it in terms of quality, it's potential distractions. We don't want those in an audiobook. We want someone listening to be able to just kind of flow through as they're listening.
Yeah, I love it. That's exactly my philosophy. When I first started out doing this, my goal was to get out of the way of the content delivery as much as possible. So anything that could take you out of that experience, whether it is outside noise, whether it's a very obvious as you're trying to breathe and gather yourself again, that can be really distracting. And I don't want that. My goal was to eliminate that as much as possible to create a consistent, smooth, easy to digest format or recording for you to get that information. The audio version is the content delivery system. It's not the content itself. So as much as possible, I wanted to allow the content to speak for itself. So yeah, I have learned, I will mention, when it comes to breath removal, I used to be really assiduous and try and remove basically 100% of them. I've since been told by some other folks in the audio industry, engineers and so forth, that 90, 95, maybe even 98% is probably fine, but occasionally having a breath in there is actually okay, because otherwise it can sound almost mechanical or unnatural. And so it's up to you to use your discretion and figure out where and when that makes sense. But I just wanted to share a little bit. All that said, again, try and remove that as much as possible. And then in terms of modulating your breathing, the other aspect of it too is not just your inhales, but your exhales, and particularly things like your plosive sounds. So having something like a pop filter, and we'll talk a little bit about equipment in a moment here. There you go. Exactly. You want to, yep. A pop filter is going to be really helpful so that the sound isn't accosting your ears if you're a listener. It's going to soften some of those sounds and make it a smoother, more pleasant experience. So that's something to be mindful as well. You can modulate that a little bit with your own delivery and your breathing style. But again, having good equipment can enhance that.
Yep. And the last thing I wanted to share on breaths is kind of going along with what you just said, Rob. But if there's any kind of dialogue in a book, and this is probably more so for fiction than nonfiction, I think that's where it can be natural. It's not necessarily getting in the way of the reader. It's just natural conversation. Someone's taking a breath. So I think thinking about things like that, where it might be natural in the book versus like just starting to speak and having a big inhale, doesn't really necessarily fit, and it makes it seem not as good.
Yeah, no, great point. When there are better and worse times for incorporating some of that. Great point. All right, so let's move on to number 2. Choose whether to record it all straight, mistakes included, or punch and roll. And we've talked about this a little bit more, and I'll just summarize. Generally, I'm a fan of straight recording. There are a number of different ways that people use to describe it, but basically, if you have an issue, don't get yourself out of the flow. Just say pause or redo. Give yourself some sort of visual or auditory cue as you're going back and editing it, and then just jump right back into it. Versus punch and roll, which is a little bit more of an involved editing technique. If you're comfortable with using your recording software, this might be a little bit easier. But basically, you make a mistake, you realize, I didn't like how that came out. Let's punch it, roll it back to right before that mistake, re-record it, and then keep going. The advantage to that is, theoretically, when it comes to the editing process, it's going to be smoother. You're not going to have to listen to and remove as many additional takes. You may still have some may slip through depending on your workflow and all of that. But theoretically, it's going to make it easier to edit, clean, and master the files when you get to that stage, as opposed to keeping all of the editing almost on the post-production side. The trade-off, the downside, in my estimation, in my opinion, is, again, it can pull you out of the recording, especially if you are doing something like a fiction work, if you do have multiple voices, if you are kind of getting into the flow of something from an actor's standpoint or a performance standpoint. You can really pull yourself out. Wait, okay, never mind, forget that, cut, go back. It can be a little bit harder to recapture that magic. So it's up to you. There are different recommendations or different approaches, but decide what you're going to do. Learn a little bit about either approach and see what works best as you're working on it.
The only thing I would add there is, once you start your book, stick with either one of these. You don't want to be jumping back and forth because they both have a little bit of a learning process, and you have to figure out what's best for you there. So I wouldn't suggest switching back and forth. I'm going to do one chapter like this and the other like that, because that's going to make it even harder when you go to edit and do the mastering and all that stuff.
Yep. Yeah. Great point. Cool. Let's move on. Choose your equipment wisely. So again, we've done a couple of other videos talking about different recording equipment and options. In fact, yesterday I did a quick side-by-side comparison of a few different microphones that we used or that I have access to, and I will include a link down below. But figure out something that's going to work for you. You might have to experiment a little bit. You might get really lucky. I mean, personally, I feel really lucky. I have the ATR 2100, and that's worked out really, really well, even in comparison to some of the other microphones that I've gotten subsequent to that. But do a little bit of research, and then really more than anything, experiment a little bit, because you'll never know until you actually have it on your device, on your system with your voice, what you like in terms of recording equipment, but then also other equipments like components like the pop filter that we mentioned, and anything else, and then the recording software that you use as well. But just approach that with some mindfulness. Thoughts on any of that, Jordan?
No, I will say that for the most part, it's not something where you have to invest a ton, but even just a little bit, getting a quality mic, getting some of that equipment, it doesn't have to be top of the line professional gear. I think, maybe, I don't know, I can't give a price range right now because that's up to you and the equipment, but don't feel like it has to be this huge investment. Even just a little bit of an investment on some good equipment, maybe not top of the line, can make a huge difference versus just recording with your phone or recording with the mic on, I'm not gonna do a recording with the mic on like this Logitech camera that I have. It's a great camera, but for recording an audiobook, it's fine for a Zoom call. And I'm using my other mic for this call, but for an audiobook, I wouldn't use just a basic mic like that, and definitely not a laptop mic. Yeah,
exactly. And I will say, that is one of the examples that I use in that video, the Logitech C920, which I have here. I mean, it sounds like I'm recording in an airplane hangar. It's not very good. If you're actually having a real-time conversation, maybe it's tolerable. But again, if you have an actual audiobook that people are paying for, you don't necessarily want that. Again, just be mindful of the finished recording sound and be your own, I don't want to say harshest critic, but be really judicious and listen to your recording and say, would I feel good about this? Would I feel good about actually paying? Try to put yourself in the eyes and the perspective of your future readers and listeners and buyers. And if you don't feel great about it, chances are that they might not feel great about it either. So hold yourself to a really high standard so that that your future listeners will be satisfied as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. All right. Next point here. Slow down. Let the listener adjust the speed up if needed. That was a little typo. Sorry about that. So yeah, great thoughts. Anything you'd like to share on that, Jordan?
This one's the hardest one for me. I have to super focus when I'm reading a book to slow down more like this speed. You want the listener to be able to be in control of that speed versus not being able to understand you because you're talking too fast. And I just think, that's my biggest issue when I'm recording. I just have to be consistently focused on it. And maybe that's not going to be an issue for you. I think with any one of these and with anything, there's going to be things that are harder for you than others. So just be mindful of it if you need to be.
Yeah, no, great point. That is something that I struggle with as well. I tend to be a little faster, a little higher energy when it comes to my recordings. You can probably tell on some of these videos. But just slowing down, being a little bit more deliberate about it can be good. I think that can also be helpful for your recording accurately as well. If you're talking a little bit faster, the likelihood of accidentally jumbling your words and having some sort of issue goes up as well. If you slow yourself down, bring a little bit more intentionality to it, you can actually perhaps reduce your error rate.
Yep.
All right, cool. Next up, location. And we're not talking about real estate, not exactly anyway. Jordan, what are we talking about?
Super important. This is probably, I think, one of the most, let's say it's the most important on this list, because if you get the initial recording good, it's going to make everything else a lot easier. And this is the first thing you want to check. I don't know if I would be able to record an audiobook that would sound good in this room because it has glass and there's things that things can bounce off of. There's nothing else in this room. But thinking about your location as a smaller area, closets work great. I've recorded my last several audiobooks in the closet back at my other apartment. We had a walk-in closet there. It was spacious enough to be sort of comfortable with a couple pillows. It was kind of funny. My wife would make fun of me while I was in there recording the book, which was fine. The end quality sounded great because the clothes in the closet kind of have that, what's the word, Rob? Like kind of pulls in that sound, dampens.
Yep, noise dampening effect and reduces the reverberation.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. So wherever you are, even if it's in a small office and you can get some just extra stuff in there, or you can get some bass traps on the walls or sound, or dampeners in another way, That doesn't have to be super complicated. You don't have to get a ton of really expensive equipment there. I know some people record with, a sweatshirt over their head and like a box. I've heard of other authors that do this, and it sounds crazy, but it just makes it so much better. So it makes it sound pretty professional because there's not this bouncing around and reverb. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. The way I like to think about it is imagine the total opposite of that kind of situation where you're speaking down an empty hall and your voice bounces across walls back and forth and has an intense echo or reverberation, and then perhaps also other tinniness or so forth. So how can you create something that's going to be the opposite of that? And like you said, oftentimes some sort of walk-in closet, carpeted floors. If you have even a comforter or something over your head, even if you have to record for 10 minutes at a time because otherwise you start sweating, that can be really good because you want that sound to be warmer, to be softer, to be rounder. I don't know if that's actually an audio engineering term, just in terms of how I think about it, that seems to be an appropriate description. So you want it to have that quality, and you don't have that quality if it's very harsh, if it's metallic, if it's bouncing around, if it's echoey and reverby and so forth. So that is creating a good listening environment. Choosing your location wisely can make a big difference in your audio narration and the final product.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, let's jump on here. Number 6, use a tablet or phone to read your book from. Jordan, for example, says, I read the Google Doc of my book when recording. This is a really good idea. I think this is something that I learned early on. If you have good sensitive recording equipment and you're turning pages of a physical book, those page turns will show up. And again, going back to the very first thought, we want to be as minimally distracting as possible for the reader and get out of the way of that content delivery experience. And if you have a device like a tablet, like a phone, like an e-reader, something that's going to allow you to silently switch pages and silently keep track of where you are in your recording, that is preferable to some sort of paper setup that you could capture some ambient noise from.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it can be as simple as just reading it on a doc file, or you could download your book as a PDF and read it on your phone or tablet as well. It doesn't have to be formatted or anything, because this one is just for you. And this is the same too, because if you read it on your computer as a PDF, your mouse could potentially pick up mouse clicks or the mouse scrolling ball. Even if it doesn't sound like a lot to you, it's something that could be picked up, and then you may not even hear it in the background, but could be potentially distracting there. So having that touch sensor is really, it's kind of awesome that we have the ability to use that, and definitely want it for recording. It's just another quick tip as far as getting that recording solid. Yeah,
love it. Great idea. All right, let's keep moving here. Number 7. Use the recording time as a final proofread for your book. Great thought. Jordan, tell me a little bit about that.
Rob, this one's funny. There's not a lot of guarantees in life, but I think as far as books go, you are guaranteed to have proofing errors in your book almost at whatever point your book is at. When I record my books, I find 2 to 3 errors per chapter when I'm reading out loud, which it sounds like a lot, but this is even after the book has been edited, proofed, read by me countless times. There's just errors there that the human eye just struggles to catch, whether it's a missing word at the end of a sentence that you as you switch to the next side, your mind puts in there. But it's a great kind of killing 2 birds kind of thing. And I found it super helpful, and it gives me peace of mind too, knowing, okay, I'm not sending my book out with all kinds of errors. I'm doing the next best step to catch as many as I can.
Yep, exactly. And this is something that we recommend even on the opposite side as a proofing technique. If you don't have the opportunity or the means to bring in an outside proofreader, then proofing it yourself by reading it aloud can be really helpful, because, again, going back to, I think, tip number 2, or rather tip number 4, slow down. When you're reading, you're necessarily going to be going slower than when you are writing, or when you're reading. And Did I get that right? When you are speaking, you're necessarily going to be going slower than when you're reading. Most people can read, several thousand words per hour more than they can speak. And so it's just going to force you to take it a little bit more slowly and catch some of those errors that might otherwise slip through that, like you said, your eye can just kind of gloss over and imagine what's there instead of seeing what is actually there.
Yep, you got it.
Cool. All right. So number 8 here. Do voices sparingly and only if you're good at it. So not everybody is going to be, I don't know, Dan Castellaneta from The Simpsons and be able to do a bunch of different voices and create very consistent and engaging character experiences. So if you're good at it, that's great. If this is your first audiobook and you've never done acting or voice acting before, maybe not the time to practice and get good at it if you're hoping for this to become a bestseller. It can be, again, distracting, especially if all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I thought that character had an Irish accent. Why does that sound Scottish now? Or, something going forward. You really do want to make sure that you're good at it and that it's consistent and reliable throughout the entire recording if you are going to commit it to an audiobook medium.
Yeah, and I think there are things that could work. I was just thinking if you really could do a killer Morgan Freeman voice and you happen to put a quote of his in your nonfiction book, yeah, by all means do that, unless it's distracting. Unless you're going to have Morgan Freeman quotes throughout your book just so that you can kind of show off that you could do his voice. Not going to recommend that. But yeah, if you're good at it, as far as like a break, as a joke or some kind of humor in your book, I think that it could be utilized well there. But yeah, for the most part, just if you have dialogue in your nonfiction book, don't feel like you have to do voices. It's okay. I think it's, from my perspective and opinion, it's more important that you read your book as a nonfiction author than it is for you to be able to do all these fun voices if you do have some dialogue in there. So it's okay just to record that similar to the rest of your book. There doesn't have to be voices there.
Yeah. No, great point. Straight reads are totally acceptable in most contexts. Most of what we do ends up being, Archangel Ink personally, is nonfiction. But even if you're doing fiction, having a straight read for fiction might make sense. And a lot of people might really appreciate that the author is narrating it himself or herself, and they don't necessarily expect them to bring a whole suite of character actors along with them.
Yep.
All right, so number 9 here, keep it interesting by changing your voice range when necessary. Fantasy narration, for example. So this is a little bit different. On the one hand, it seems like, oh, you just told me not to do character voices or not to change it up too much. Why are you telling me now to change it up? I think that the difference is you can modulate your tone, your pace, your vocal inflection, on a case-by-case basis or as appropriate throughout the text, more so and more easily than you can maintain a character voice over the course of a whole narrative.
Yeah, I think it's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard balance because you don't want your book feeling monotone. You don't want it to feel as if the author doesn't have energy. So I think potentially when you're talking about subjects that you're really passionate about inside your book, I know I've done this for my recordings. I could tell that, my voice was getting faster. It was just, I was more into it at certain points. And I think that's fine because I think that adds to a nice flow. The fantasy narration example, one of my favorite narrators, his name is Victor Bavine. He does narration for the Dark Elf trilogy with Dritz Do'Urden, which is one of my favorite nerd things to read. I'm sure there's some Dritz fans out there that are listening to this or will listen to this. But he gets going like super fast if they're in like a fight scene or a battle because he wants to describe like what's going on. And it's a very similar thing there. I think it's fine to do it at those times when it makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. No, great point. All right. And finally, number 10. Don't be afraid to pause if needed throughout, and definitely pause at the beginning to give room noise. So yeah, this is an important element when it comes to the engineering side of it or the audio editing side of it. You want to have some sort of example of room noise as your floor, as your base background sound, and it's okay. It's okay to pause if you're losing track or losing sight of it. You are going to go back and do the editing, presumably, or if you have somebody else do the editing, and having dead air is totally fine. You don't have to fill it with you struggling or stammering or trying to and ah your way through it or think out loud. It's totally fine. Take a break, pause, regroup, get yourself back on track and start again.
Yeah, I think, yeah, especially with this one, your voice is going to start to get tired before you even realize it and before you can even hear it. So you're going to be at the end of potentially a chapter or two, and then all of a sudden it's just going to sound different. And that's something you don't necessarily hear right off the bat. You hear later on when it's already too late. So just think about that. Think about the fact that you really do need to take a break. You can't really say about chapter because chapters are different lengths, but try to do the best you can to notice when you're starting to get tired and kind of, oh, I don't know if I can keep going. Yeah, leave the room, take a break, move on to something else, and then come back. It's a hard thing, and I've tried to do this. It's hard. It's a hard thing to marathon and get it done. I've done it fairly quickly, but I've learned that I did need to take sufficient breaks in between because talking just takes a lot of energy out of you anyway. I had a friend of mine tell me that talking for 1 hour is equivalent to an 8-hour workday. I don't know how true that is, but I know sometimes, yeah, if you're just talking relentlessly, it can be tiring.
Yep. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. There's a physical side to it as well, and you build up your endurance when you are practicing and engaging with this. Another thing that we didn't mention here, but I'll mention as well. Practice beforehand, get a sense of what it's actually going to take from you and how long it's going to take. And also start to build up that those vocal capacity, that vocal strength and agility and capacity as you're going along, because it can be tiring, and there might end up being a difference in the sound of your voice from the beginning of the recording to the end of the recording if you're trying to marathon it through. If your voice starts to get a little bit tired and softer or weaker, or the tone changes or pitch changes somewhat, then you don't necessarily want that. It might be better to, okay, it's a 4-hour recording. I'm going to do 2 hours today and 2 hours another time in a different session, or 1 and 1 and 1 and 1. Whatever is going to allow you to have the highest quality, most consistent sound throughout the entire recording is probably the best bet. And yeah, it'd be nice to power through and, okay, man, I really want to have this done. And you may be able to, people have different tolerances and different capacities, but yeah, just bear in mind that it's not as simple as, walking, just going for a walk for 8 hours versus 2 hours. You will get tired, and there are different muscles, especially if you haven't done this before, that you're going to be activating and making use of. So beware of potential physical limitations. Yeah.
Good deal.
All right. And let's wrap up. Actually, one other thought that I had, which is not, which we can call number 11, is
bonus
thought. When you set up your recording station, do it in a way that allows you the greatest amount of consistency between sessions. So, for example, if you have a boom microphone, you want it in the same place. You want it to sound the same time to time. You don't want to have to, contort yourself. You want the microphone in a place where it's going to pick up the right level of sound without you having to work too hard at it. If you have to kind of bend over and talk at this funny angle or something, then chances are you're going to get tired, and that the vocal recording is going to be different from session to session. So think about ergonomics when you're setting your studio up, setting your recording area up, and try and make it as smooth and simple as easy as possible. Any work that you can do beforehand to make it consistent is going to pay dividends on the back end when you actually have the finished recording.
Yeah, that is so crucial, Rob, because I've noticed even just like this much of a different distance from my mic can make a significant difference in wavelength when you're looking at the audio file. And then that's okay if it's different, because you can do things to amplify your voice. There's things you can do on the back end, but the more consistent you can make it the first time, the better and easier it's going to be for you, because Audible especially wants the book to be a certain, it needs to pass certain parameters. And if things are all over the place, if one chapter all of a sudden it's really loud or really quiet, that's not necessarily a good user experience, and they don't want that. Right. So that's definitely crucial. I think you could use tape or use whatever you need to do to make sure that it's consistent, but keep things in the same place and try not to mess with it. I've already moved this mic and changed this positioning while I've been on this call, because I just fiddle with things sometimes. So that's something for me to remember. But yeah, you want to get it as consistent as possible.
Cool. Yeah, no, great
Good deal.
thoughts here. All right, so let's wrap up here. Any concluding thoughts on all of this, Jordan? And in creating a good, high quality audiobook narration for your own audiobook.
My concluding thought is that it's fun. I think it's doable. It's not. I think for most people, it's not this extreme. It's not full of extreme difficulties. Now there are certain things that you do have to get used to and figure out, like getting equipment, setting up the room, and all of that. But it's doable. I would say if I can do it, anyone can do it. I'm not the best audiobook narrator, but I had fun doing my books, and I know that people that listen to my books appreciated me, the author, doing that. For at least in my genre and what I write in, I think there's just that connectedness piece. When I'm telling my own stories, there's emotion that I can put in there in the audiobook and whatnot that I think is just super valuable. So yeah, I think it's definitely something for authors to consider doing, and it's doable. So give it a try. It's fun. That's all I have to say.
Yep, love it. Great points. And then my concluding thought is practice. Get yourself prepared, do some research and experimentation ahead of time, get yourself used to it and familiar with it, and then put yourself in the end user experience. Not everybody is going to have an audio engineering or mastering background. And there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve. Expect that there's going to be some of that going on. But like you said, Jordan, it is achievable, it is doable. And if you're keeping the listener in mind and trying to create something that you would love to listen to on your own as well, then I think you have a good shot of creating something that's going to be really distinctive, unique, and engaging. And again, it's coming from the author's own voice, and that carries a lot of value for listeners. So enjoy.
Yep.
Cool. All right. So with that, everybody, if you have thoughts, questions, experiences, have you created any audiobooks on your own? Is there anything that you struggle with? Anything that you found that works really well? Let us know. Leave any thoughts, and down below, any additional comments or questions or topics that you'd like us to address. We're always happy to hear that and see if we can continue to provide some value for you. So with that, everybody, have a great evening, and we will see you folks next time.